Welcome to the Mystic-Skeptic radio show and podcast, the program in which we ask the tough questions and explore different alternatives to today's pressing issues, theories, or enigmas. Our show is devoted to the exploration of all things mystical, philosophical, scientific, political, conspiratorial, and cosmic. Join us in an exploration of the Mystic-Skeptic mind space. In this week's show, our guest is Joe Baylog. He is our correspondent for religious spiritual affairs. Still into Greek philosophy and teach you at a Catholic seminary?
Not into it, but I am studying something right now that is philosophical.
So remember how Aquinas talks about, but actually, is it Aristotle? I think Aquinas kind of piggybacked on him about the good. Ever heard about that?
Yes, the good is just or evil, the opposite of that. The evil is the absence of the good.
So is it according to Aristotle or Plato?
I understood it was according to Aristotle.
Okay, Aristotle defines the supreme good as an activity of the rational soul in accordance with virtue. Virtue for the Greeks is equivalent to excellence. Aristotle defined moral virtue as this position to behave in the right manner as a mean between extremes of deficiency and excess, which are vices. Okay, so what did your boy Aquinas say about that? So the natural law functions in a way that is analogous to the aforementioned principles. According to Aquinas, all human actions are governed by a general principle or precept that is foundational to and necessary to all practical reasoning. Good is to be done and evil is to be avoided. So.
Yes, that makes sense. When I was studying Aristotle, the thing that the priest at the time was teaching was that Aristotle's point exactly, that the good or virtue is the mean between an excess or an excess of something or a defect of something is not actually true, is not the point that he was trying to make. It was the good is the end for which we aim for, not some kind of calculation of I'm just going to have so much of something or not so much of something, and I'm just going to go for the middle ground.
Okay. Well, we're going to start the show with that quote, those two quotes, because there's a lot of stuff going around, and we're going to do controversial shows all throughout the season. And this season is starting in September, so we have the whole summer to pick fights, to think about it, to re-edit them and reframe them so they actually make sense. And the reason I brought Joe has been an ongoing guest, is because I am sick and tired of people trying to use religion, conservative values, and this traditionalist perspective to shut down everything they don't agree with. So something major happens and all the good people get involved, and then the conservatives that are good people too, they're like, well, I'm not going to get involved because that has nothing to do with me. And it's like, whoa. If the idea of the conservative movement is that they are pro-democratic values, because without the democracy, you cannot live these self-imposed rules that a lot of conservatives have, such as a free economy and a free system where you can speak your mind and you can have your own business and be free from government intervention and be free from religious persecution. All these freedoms that they think are very important can only exist within the system that we live in, that is a democracy. And I know that it's like the cult of capitalist democracy. In the last show, we were talking about the difference between a socialist democracy and a capitalist democracy. So let's say that capitalism is fantastic, and that's the way that we should run the world. And it's a financial system. People usually conflate a financial system and a political system. But let's say that it's fine and dandy. When the system is not working properly, the traditionalists always want to take a step back and say, well, we all make mistakes. Freedom involves fallacy and falling for our vices, like we're talking in the quote. So that's part of human nature, that people make mistakes, and that we all, we just have to keep trucking. It's an experiment that we're all part of, and we're just slowly making it happen. But only if they only get involved and it affects them. If it doesn't affect them, then I don't care. And that's really what bothers me, because they are conservative African Americans, conservative Latinos, conservative Italians and Irish, and of all different groups. But right now we're in the midst of the spotlight is on police brutality against minorities. And, there's, the Asian community, the Indian community, that some people consider part of Asians, they're not really that involved because they're in a different bracket of socioeconomic status. So they're kind of somewhere in between. But the Latinos and the African Americans, since a vast number of them are of low means, they are embroiled in this this thing that is coming to the surface. And Joe and I have gone back and forth. I used to be very traditionalist on every level. I know he was too at one point, and then we both went hippie, and then we came back, and then I'm in the middle, and he's on the other side, and it's just back and forth with our political, social, and religious views. But there has to be a point where no matter where you're at and what you're going through in your life, there are some things that are right, and there are some things that are wrong, and there's a time to stand up, and there's a time to stand back. And that's what I want to work through with Joe. So tell me, how is it in Michigan? What have you heard from Black Lives Matter, anti-police brutality, and the opposition? What has been your experience, or what you have heard in the small town you live in? You're in Michigan?
Yes. And
so tell us what's going on that side of the world.
The town that I'm in, Grand Rapids, has been, I guess, not as bad as Minneapolis in the sense of there haven't been as many riots, demonstrations as have been in other larger cities. What I've heard is that people are, there's police brutality. One man was shot cold-blooded, or not, with a canister, a tear gas canister, and this might have not happened in Grand Rapids, but that he was at his house and a police officer came up to the house to check on him or something and shot him in the back. And that came up in conversation because we're talking about the use of tear gas, and that was illegal, except I guess in special cases. But that, at least for the city of Grand Rapids, that my understanding of what this person was telling me was that it was illegal in Grand Rapids. And so that was one. And then another one was a woman was shot in her room in cold blood. The police officers went in to investigate. There was somebody at the door, but some officer went in and just shot her 8 times in her bed. And I thought that was extraordinary. Again, I'm not sure if that was Grand Rapids or that was another city, but I've never, I've heard things. Black Lives Matter for me has been something that I've known about since college. So I have some knowledge about where the movement began, and watching things on Twitter back in college and seeing things develop and getting more kind of growing into a grassroots movement. And the thing about Grand Rapids is that it is a small town, and so people are generally quiet to themselves, but there is some diversity. There's a mix of people. There are Black people who live here. There's a Black community. There's a Hispanic community. There's all kinds of people. There's Russians. There's Lithuanians. There's Eastern Europeans. There's it's not as prevalent in as other cities. As you know, I was living in Chicago for a few years, and so that obviously has a totally different scale to the number of people in these ethnicities. And so what is going on is seeing the protestings were happening, the demonstrations were happening, there was gatherings downtown, mostly young people and some older people, but they're holding signs. There was everyone's asking you to honk your horn when you go by. People are honking. And so the thing that I noticed the most about Grand Rapids that was alarming was that, because I didn't hear a lot about police reports. I haven't really been reading the news, haven't been checking in on things. I've been trying to get my own business started and trying to stay focused on that. So I haven't been keeping up on what's going on. But what I did notice was the destruction of the property downtown Grand Rapids, the broken glass. There's the wood up in the buildings, the plywood that is shielding the glass, or shielding the or being in place where the glass is not there anymore. And so people came along, and one great thing I saw was people were decorating and painting it with different symbols, with beautiful art, with words, with slogans for various things. And so that's basically what I've seen, kind of what I've heard. Not sure what's going on more recently than that. It seems to have calmed down a bit. The police were out. They were on horse. They were, I don't know what they had with them on the horses. Batons, I guess. I don't know if those were used in a violent manner at all, or manner, but the police were waiting in parking lots for a while all around the city, and that was mixed in with what's been going on with the quarantine and everything that's going on with COVID. It's kind of been a desert town in general anyways, with business being closed, people aren't downtown, so it's an open field for people just to come in and hang out and be there. So it's been very different to see the city close down at the same time these protests happening and people out in the streets. And one guy, the only anecdotal story I have is one guy, I was driving my car, and he came up to, he was sitting there and he was like, honk, honk. And I was like, I didn't really feel like honking, so I didn't honk. And he's like, honk, honk. And I looked at him, and he had a kind of this like jest on it. I think maybe he was just trying to tease me or something, but I didn't honk. But every time I go down there, I always notice the people and the protesters and try to see what is it that they're saying and what is it that they're experiencing, because it's an interesting mix of people. Elderly, I did see one elderly woman sing down there, and then obviously lots of young people, young adults. So that's kind of how things are going here. There's probably more to it. But
what about on the other side, people protesting for wearing masks and things like that?
Is that your daughter?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people saying wear masks. There's every business I've gone to in the past few weeks, they have mask signs up and asking people to put them on, or saying it's mandatory to wear them just to go inside to get your hair cut, or but that's calmed down a little bit. People are kind of scaling back a little bit, but Michigan being the state that has held on the longest, from what I've heard, that it's taken us a long time to remove those restrictions, so that those policies are still in place, and people are a mixed, some people are doing it and some people aren't, and I choose to do it because that's my choice, and I think it's a good thing to do, to be a part of society and to be civil about it, and that's the way our governors decide to run it. So I'm going to comply with that. And it's kind of interesting. It's different by neighborhood. Some neighborhoods are less restrictive. You don't see people out and about wearing masks, and some are very much. My neighborhood that I live in here is, I would say there's still quite a few people that I see wearing masks every day just to be outside and to walk or go to the grocery store. So, or to the gas station. So it's still there. Whereas in Florida, I've heard that there was not many people wearing masks. Things are back to normal, so to speak, and that that people aren't having that responsibility. So,
do you ever on Facebook or at church, do you hear these ridiculous conspiracies and attacks on prevention? Like, I go into one thing and I get all blasted by, this is America, you can't force me to wear a mask, and how dare the government, cause us harm by putting masks on us, and the masks are going to kill you, and this and that. Because what people are saying is that, why is it that people are upset at the protesters against police brutality, but they weren't upset when there was all these right-wing protesters getting in the face of the governor and the mayor and all these people? I don't know if it was in your state or another one next to it, where they were getting really like aggressive, and the police wasn't doing anything. The police was like standing back. They had people walk around with bazookas, and nobody cared. And now you have kids. Some of them, are throwing rocks. Some of them are getting upset and breaking police cars and stuff like that. But the vast majority are peaceful, and the police is going bananas. Why is it that some people feel so threatened by precautions that makes them go protest, and now that the police feels threatened when people are protesting the need for supporting minorities and not letting them get trampled by the authorities?
It's a good question. I think that people are upset on either side because they don't see the point of doing something that they don't agree with is personally valuable to them. I think there's a confusion about the facts, and people have different various levels of knowledge of what the facts are, and that informs their opinion, and then that informs their action. So when they don't agree with it's not something that they like, and they're not going to do it. So whether it's for the authorities and the police, that whether it's them and not wanting to wear masks for the sake of other people, or whether it's the civilians and not wanting to wear masks or to comply with the authorities and doing what they are asking them to do, then I think that friction, that lack of communication about what is really going on, then their reality, their view of reality is different, and so they don't see things in the same way, and so that's going to lead to conflict. It's going to be it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Yeah. Personally, I think that it would be great if everybody could just get along, but it's not how it works out, and especially on the civil level. When I was in college, I remember going to a protest for coal-fired power plants in Bay City, Michigan, to ask the commissioners there to not allow the plant to continue to be opened or to run, because I was looking at the environmental aspect and how it would affect the health of the employees, of the families, of the citizens, and that's one way of looking at it. But I think when it comes down to it, people are more likely to do what they think is best and not not just what other people tell them to do. So,
Well, as religious people, I want to ask you, have you seen from your bishops or metropolitans or anybody from the Orthodox community write a letter in support of government precautions for the COVID crisis, or in support of the protests against brutality from the police against minorities?
I have seen letters from the higher Blessed John X. So he's the head of the Antiochian Church, the and then the Bishop Anthony, who has followed up on more local directives, and the priests that I am at the church with, they just follow what they say and report back what they say, and then add any details about how that's going to change the parish life. And so that's a really reassuring point for me, because during the quarantine, the letters that were coming from I always get confused. Having a Catholic background, I get confused between the verbiage for the verbiage for a priest, a bishop, in the hierarchy, because there's no pope in the Orthodox Church. So you can't say like what is the highest position unless you're in an Ethiopian Orthodox Church or another type of of Orthodox Church. But the Antiochian Orthodox Church is blessed, I think, is the highest. Oh, he's a patriarch. So his patriarch. His letters have always been in support of whatever the authorities are doing. That's what we're going to do. And what that looks like on each level at each parish, each church or district is a little different, because it's a state by state consideration or country by country, right? So what he has said is work with your authorities on what the plan of actions are going to be at particular parishes. So we cut back, we closed down from being a full parish, it's fully open, and then March came along, and we went down to nothing almost overnight. It was pretty fast. So everyone was praying from home. We had set up resources getting shared for everybody, and had services in our houses and shared things via Zoom, and had services via Zoom for those 2 months or so. And then now that things have changed, he's written another one saying, we're so glad that things are getting better and things are starting to open up, and we can go back to a normal church life, a normal parish life, liturgical life. And the part about what the authorities are saying, we're still going to follow those directives, and we're going to take them seriously, and we're going to keep it at 10, or whether it's 50, or whether it's how many people, and we're still going to do the 6 feet apart at each parish, and we're going to keep it to a chanter and 2 chanters. But they need, in our parish, for instance, they had to be separated on the other side of the churches, on the other side of the church, and then have so many altar servers, and only for a while there was the priests, the altar servers, and the chanters, and that was it. So that's 5 people, and depending on how you size your parish is. But that was pretty much it. Now we're down to everybody can go, but we're outside. So the parishioners are outside, and that came from a letter that he wrote saying, we're so glad and excited and joyful that we can have a move towards a normal liturgical life and have parish back, but we're still going to keep up with these precautions. So we're going in. We ask you to follow the directives of your local bishop and the authorities based on your state. So in the state of Michigan, because things are more restrictive, as far as I understand, that we are still keeping distance. We're still cleaning, something that I've personally been doing, like cleaning the parish, like wiping down surfaces, after service on Saturday. And then we are just following and trying to figure it out as we go,
Let me ask you, have you seen the movie Selma?
Yes, I have.
So remember the part where there was a bishop, an Orthodox bishop that shows up, and Martin Luther King is happy to see him, and then he marches with him on the second march. The first march, they were beat up. The second march, they made it to the bridge, and then they turned around because MLK was worried that they were going to get attacked. And then finally, they marched one last time when they got permission to march by the judge. So what would it take for your community to get involved in the support of Black lives, or for it to be at that point of like it was in the civil rights movement, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what it would take. I don't know if there's a precedence for it as there was in the Roman Catholic Church, where you had a lot more social justice minded people and influences ever since John Paul II started. Well, before him, you could say Paul VI with Labore y what's the second one? He wrote his encyclical. It was the first social encyclical in the 1920s, before World War II, and it was on labor rights and unions. And so that was a founding for a whole history for the next, up until today, that of folks writing about social issues, economics, labor union is always a big thing, rights, racism, and a whole host of the war. How do we react against that? Women's rights, liberation theology came out of that, and those documents made such an impression on the church, on the Roman Church, that in the Second Vatican Council, you had that whole shift into a whole different way of doing liturgy, a whole different way of having masses, and those were part of this liberal movement that the church took into itself, into its body, and the spirit of the times was to be open to new things, open to new ideas. And they developed that into a very, I wouldn't say rigorous, but they certainly gained their own voice into influencing world politics and how it would develop. John Paul II's photo of being in South America in front of, I can't remember the guy's name, the famous socialist, like 1973, that after taking that, he's before him, or this famous socialist, I think he was a writer too, he was kneeling down before John Paul II, or maybe they were embracing, but it showed his humility in front of him, and John Paul II wouldn't forgive him. I remember reading this, he wouldn't forgive him because of the influence that he had, even though John Paul II himself had many socialist ideas. Being from Poland was interesting though too, because he had experienced World War II, he had experienced the invasion of the Bolshevik revolution going on in Russia. So in 1956, Hungary was invaded, but he was part of this anti-socialist, anti-Russia movement from his experience during World War II, and coming out of that built a momentum for him to speak out against it and to write against it, to be an activist, I guess. And so he developed a lot of those ideas, and those ideas grew into his encyclicals, and his encyclicals are prevalent. He wrote many encyclicals after Blessed John Paul the 23rd, who was his not protege, was the man above him, the Pope previous to him, that it was his influence and his writings that I think influenced a lot of the Roman Church. But in the Orthodox Church, I really don't know, where you have different standings, you have different opinions. People in Ukraine, the Ukrainian church is very active. They're being persecuted right now, as far as I understand. They have, I think it's Ukrainian. They have been shut down, not allowed to go to services. The government said that they couldn't go, couldn't have church in the same way as had before. So they've been speaking out against that. But that's not to your point. To your point about Black Lives Matter, I'm not aware of any article, person, Orthodox religious person that has written out anything. I'm sure there are, because there's certainly Orthodox organizations of different political leanings that I'm sure have said things. But
the reason that I ask is because it's been like this boiling point of frustration, not only from the economic problems from the pandemic, the social unrest of being anxious that some people are dying in your community. They say, there's a large number of African Americans and Latinos who are sick from the virus and are dying. Then there's issues with just the ongoing social problems that have always been around. But the 60s, now everybody claims they protested. Everybody claims that they stood up against oppression. And it's the same thing for World War II. Like, now everybody says that they didn't like Hitler and they didn't like what was going on. And we know that that's not true. That most people are apathetic and they just let things happen. And then when it gets really bad, then maybe they'll say something. But even then, most people want to just mind their own business and stay out of trouble. So the reason that I asked that is because I've been thinking about being passive and allowing for these things to take place. And of course, there are people on both sides, people who dismiss victimization of minorities by authorities. And then there's people who emphasize it to the point of everybody's a white supremacist and every statue needs to be removed and the whole system is corrupt. So people who are in the middle or who have kind of like there's always fears that you might jump on a movement before finding out its true intentions. So the way that you can keep people away from picking sides is to throw propaganda on each side of the issue. So whenever there's concerns about police brutality, they always say that it's anti-police, that usually people who support cop killing and who support the disintegration of the services provided by the police, and that they just want everybody to walk around passing out flowers. And then on the other hand, you see people saying, no, there are true issues that need to be addressed, but maybe we should just get rid of everything or recreate the police department to a more equitable and representative community-led group and things like that. But what I think is most important is that we should not forget our values and the principles that we all agree on. So that's why I wrote a tiny little post and I sent it to you about the need for advocacy and protection of peaceful demonstrators. And it's funny that you don't ever hear it called demonstrators or ralliers or whatever. I don't know what the term is for someone that rallies, but when you watch the movie Selma, you see people who are doing a march. And how is it that when people march now, they're not people who are marching, they are protesters, or there's civil unrest or something. When a march is just a march, it's just a bunch of people come together and they walk from one area to another and they share their grievances. Well, now there's this automatic perspective that they are angry. So I think the term protester denotes that they're angry. And then you have looters and you have anarchists. So they also get a lot of attention. But all the peaceful demonstrators are never interviewed and asked, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? How can we help you get there? It's just this us versus them, because then they'll go to the police officer and say, well, how do you feel about what's going on? oh, I feel persecuted, I feel disrespected, blah, blah, blah. And there's never this like, okay, well, I see where they're coming from, or I don't agree. There's never like a good description of what's going on. It's a politically charged description. So what I say in the post is that as a former union organizer, I know that for a fact, not all protests are just, and that it's easy to manipulate people to do your dirty work. So I saw times where if we were protesting for the rights of migrant workers, you would go get everybody upset at a mostly Latino neighborhood, get them to join you in the protest by getting into the school buses, take them to downtown, and then unleash people that are already upset and they feel that there's racism, and then have a confrontation with the police on purpose, and then take pictures to show that the people are being victimized by the police. To me, that is unacceptable because that is manipulating people and trying to make it seem like it's a racial issue when it's usually an immigration problem or an exploitation problem. But you try to paint it in these broad brushes of discrimination, so then it's easy to win because it's making the police look bad, the companies look bad, and it's a very emotional thing. It's not clear cut. People are not getting the resources they need, or the benefits or the hours. It's more like us versus them kind of mentality. So I'm always worried about that. And then this dismissal when you hear a lot of conservatives say, whatever, they're just a bunch of whiners. The amount of people that get killed by the police is very tiny. It's usually an accident, or it's provocation. It's not this rampant mass slaughter of people. Using the term white supremacist to me creates a lot of problems, because then if you say that America's supremacist, then the KKK and the neo-Nazis have won, and they've actually infiltrated everywhere, and they've taken over, and we're all living under their rule. And that is not true. There are a very small percentage of people who are like that. There are racist laws. There are racist, follow through, like in the sense of more people get incarcerated in some communities than others. There's also the poverty problem. There's other issues that get dismissed, and then it's all about race. And white supremacist ideas are very specific. And we see some of these ideas that are true, like why people get bigger of a break if they do something bad. But it's not this white supremacist militancy or sovereignty that people are connecting it to, where, there is like a cabal of white people who sit around and they say, how are we going to oppress the poor Latinos and African Americans? There might be like a subconscious aspect of that, but it's not systematic or systemic, in my opinion. I know some people say systemic in the sense of everywhere you go around the country, if you are darker, you are mistreated and you're not given the same rights. And that's what I want to fight against, and that's what I want to support. So then the next part of it is how 56 years ago, when they had the Selma march, there was a unity that we don't see now. Even though there's only a third of non-African Americans who were involved in the marches, there was a sense that what was happening was wrong. That we all agreed that Americans had the right to vote, they had the right to protest, they had the right to assemble, to seek access to voting ballots and booths, that the rights weren't being equally distributed among our citizens. Everybody had come to the point of agreement. Now, if you are trying to get there, it's easy to be thrown from one side to the other, either from the radical left to the radical right, and there's no middle ground that is actually effective to move us forward. And so I say that it's urgent for us to defend the rights of those seeking justice and advocate for the protection of everyone under the law, regardless of race, religion, and other characteristics. So the one thing I've never heard during this time is, it's been a month since the death of George Floyd. I haven't heard anybody talk about civil rights. Like, they've acted like civil rights is already over. Everybody has civil rights. Well, the definition of civil rights is that everybody gets protection under the law, regardless of race, religion, or other characteristics. So let's say that someone's walking down the street and they look suspicious. Whatever happened to Miranda rights, whatever happened to guilty, innocent until proven guilty, whatever happened to all that? What we see let's say there's 20 or 30 or 50 cases in the last 10 years. What we see is that none of those protocols are kept. That suddenly they see someone and they run or they act threatening or whatever, so according to the police, and then shoot and then ask questions later. There's not the sense of like, hey, let's sit down and talk about it, or hey, let's take you in and question you. There's just this automatic response that it's life or death, to the point of extermination of the problem or the concern without following these protocols. So I can see the reason that people are upset is because we have been promised that in this country we have laws, that in this country we have a system that is supposed to be fair, and it's not fair. And you can say, well, it's fair for most people. They're just, these 30 individuals have had a bad time, or, they fell through the cracks. Any life is too many. And what bothers me is that it only upsets people when it's people in their community. If it's not in your community or someone that looks like you, a lot of people don't care. And that is, in a sense, racism. Because if it was blonde, blue-eyed people who this was happening to, there would be an outrage. There would be people truly protesting in the streets, like tons and tons of people. The large amount of population that we have from the Europeans and white Americans would be all enraged and going bananas, because it would affect people that look like them. But because they don't look like them and they're in a different socioeconomic status and in education level or whatever, then it doesn't matter. Then it's like, whoops, it just happened. So that's where I think the civil rights movement was able to express their concerns, either through people seeing it on TV, young people being attacked by dogs or by hoses or being beaten in the street. That brought about the sense of, this is disgusting, this is unacceptable. And we haven't gotten to that point. So how do we as religious people just sit around allowing for this to happen? So I think that the religious leaders have a responsibility to stand in support of their fellow human beings as we seek the well-being of the world. The other problem is that we come to this point of desensitization that is happening in our country. When we see people getting beat up or attacked in any way in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and anywhere, we are upset when we see little kids, that are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea because they can't make it to Europe. We're unhappy. So now we see young people seeking justice for their fellow human beings, and we're callous. We're like, oh, they don't know how to behave, or they're too aggressive, or what were these people doing? Like, why can there be this sense of compassion where it's like, well, let's start with the idea that all human life is sacred. And then take a step back. It's like the police officer is sacred, and the victim or perpetrator or criminal is sacred. And then let's see how can we bring reconciliation between communities that feel threatened by the police, with police that feel threatened by those communities and those individuals, between the way you go about de-escalating conflict, using violence as the only response to people that might cause violence against you, the amount of weapons that are available for everybody to come at it after each other. Those are the things that concern me. But if we just tune out and listen to the pundits on either side, then we get neutralized and we don't do anything. We say, well, one side is too crazy and the other one's too crazy, or one is dismissive and the other one's too aggressive, and then you're left with nothing. And then what has to happen for it to get to the point that it affects us? And that's, I've been talking to a lot of people about the issue with masks. And there's people who are like, I'm not gonna wear a mask, I don't care. And then working in the medical field, we know that the only way you're going to care is that if it affects you and your family. So once they start having a family or friend who has the virus and spreading it to other people, or once they see people die from the disease that they're aware of, then as the people start getting worried and they put on the mask and they start being more cautious. What do we have to experience as a people to feel that minorities are being overly policed or overly, the responses to crime or possible crime or fear of crime are too excessive? What has to happen? Does it have to be a security guard in the building that we work? Does it have to be a guy that we met at the coffee shop? Like, who has to die for people to actually stand up and be worried that things are getting out of hand?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Let me give you an example. So remember when they had that issue at Starbucks where two African Americans, I think they were actually people from Africa, they were sitting around waiting for their friend, and the people, the manager, whoever at Starbucks went up to them and was like, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm just waiting for my friend." "Well, eat something, drink something." And they're like, "No, we're okay." And then they call the cops. So if you would have been there, would you have said something? You've been sitting next to those people. Would you say, "Hey, leave them alone, they're just chilling"?
I would hope I would. I would hope I would.
But do we have that passion? Do we have that impetus within ourselves to be like, "Hey, something is going wrong"? Or we're gonna be like, "We don't know these people. Maybe they caused trouble in the past. Maybe there's something that people know about these guys that is making them nervous. So I need to stay out of Dodge and let the authorities handle it."
I think that would generally be my response, because if there's just so much you don't know, when you see them, that it is true what you say. I don't know these people. Maybe this person knows them better, or the police know them better. I think, it's tricky.
But do you think that's one of the issues with the modern world that we live in, that everybody minds their business too much, and we're so glued to our TVs or laptops or our phones, and like everybody wants to put a black screen on their phone, or they wants to say, Black Lives Matter, away and far away from what's going on? I know there's people who are sincere and they've gone to the protest, and you're putting yourself at risk by going to a protest because it's a spreader of the virus. So you have to be in a very firm place to be willing to go put yourself out there. But this idea that we're all going to jump on the bandwagon, but from far away. And what you hear now is that people are saying, even comedians, people are looking around for a black friend so they can prove that they're not racist, or that they're overdoing it. I'm going to watch every black movie they have on Netflix. So I understand what they're going through. That's what's silly to me. It's whatever happened to kids in cages? People were so worried about immigrant children being mistreated, and now nobody talks about that. And they moved on to the next issue, and that's police brutality. And we did a show about police brutality when the show started 5 years ago. And I did move on because there's so many other issues to talk about. But now I feel bad that was only one show I did. And I did one about human trafficking, and I did one about supporting the veterans, and one anti-war show with the Veterans for Peace. And I feel like, am I not responding with the level of interest to these issues? But there's so many issues, and how can you be an effective voice for change? Because what really happens is that traditionalist people or conservative people, they want to keep things the way they are. And to me, that's living in La La Land. If you think that there's no social problems, there's no racial problems, there's no financial problems, there's no economic or political problems, then you're out of your mind. But you hear people say, well, that's why America is great, and that's why America needs to go back to its baseline, because everything is fine. Well, I don't know why these people are making such a big deal. Is it fine? If it was fine, nobody would be complaining. What do you think, Joe?
I think that it's not necessarily true that the conservatives or traditionalists don't think that there aren't problems, because I think they just see the problems differently. And the solutions to those problems are addressed in a different way. So that I think the major issue between the two political poles would be that they just generally don't see life in the same way from from their vantage point. So I think they see the problems, but just they see them in different ways, almost two sides to a coin or something. So for instance, economics, in a liberal economic policy for COVID was to give everybody a ton of money and just do that. And there's different ways. There's interesting things about digital currency. Let's create a digital currency to expedite this process. And let's talk about the plight of the communities of minorities and try to get help to where it's needed the most, to the fastest way possible. That makes a lot. And the conservative side, that was, let's talk about doing it, but let's address it slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. And if we want to give people money, how are we going to do that in such a way that we don't generate tons of more debt and more problems? And I think because you have on either side looking at the solution in a different way, and you have different solutions that were proposed. Ultimately, what happened, obviously, was that Trump and the Republicans sided with the liberals on the policy and how it was going to happen. I don't think they were extremely happy with how it all went down in generating now billions of dollars more debt. But the system that we have for debt too is a whole nother topic of conversation, and how debt gets alleviated, how debt gets generated, about the what's it called? Oh, the Federal Reserve System. And the conservatives, liberals might have different opinions about how that system works, but how economics works and how politics influences it, I think, is kind of its own thing too. But to go back to social issues, though, the liberals see social issues as a minority group. There's this us, and we're all together in this, and we're all gonna get together and figure out how to do it, how to solve this problem. And on the conservative side, you have people who are more, social issues are a symptom of deeper problems that we need to address analytically, carefully, and with consideration to all the consequences that could happen because we decide to do something. Whereas, you're right. I mean, being more conservative, and I'm in Grand Rapids, which is kind of just a progressive town, that I can see both sides, but the conservative side has a point where the ramifications of an action are very important to consider, and not just the glamorification of poverty. Because there's an issue, there's a problem with the liberal side, that having myself lived in Mexico, been to Kenya, saw people in cages in Jamaica, and it's a very complicated social fabric, and the decisions and the people who are involved in making these decisions, getting people into these places, are not going to be solved by a protest. I'm sorry, they're not. And this is coming from my era of thinking, and things have been different in the past, and things are solved in different ways in the past. But I don't. see how going in the streets, as I did in college, was a way to get the change that I wanted to see. Martin Luther King's quote, or Gandhi's quote, be the change that you want to see in the world. And that just kind of, I don't know, that looking back on it, that kind of makes more sense now. But what was the point we were trying to get to here? What was your question?
It's just that if you believe that the reason that we have poverty is because people make bad choices and governments make bad choices, and you make people addicted to help or something like that, like you make people dependent on programs and government, and that's what causes poverty, that people are not they don't have the impetus to find the right resource and stuff like that, then you're going to come up with a different solution. That if you believe that the poverty comes from centuries of lack of interest and lack of the creation of jobs and creation of opportunities for particular groups of people. The problem is that everything always falls it's either a polarity that like both things are true at the same time, or it falls right in the middle, where both issues affect, and some of them are, motivated by personal choices, and some of them are motivated by structural issues. So that's my problem, is that the groups are too polarized, where, they say, well, you're either government is going to fix all your problems, or I'm going to fix my own problems and I'm going to pull my bootstrap. And it's like, come on, man. We live in a society that has elements of both socialism and, this, because again, both socialism and capitalism can be financial or economic systems, but politically, we have this idea that there are some government agencies that are crucial and you can't get rid of, and then you have some other ones that are they come and go depending on the administration, and then you also have charities and you have churches and you have all this other stuff. So I see where you're saying that the good version of conservatism would be, we have to make decisions carefully, methodically, that are actually going to show the results. And then the negative version of progressive or liberal ideas is that we're just going to try to do a quick fix, that we're just going to do what we think is going to work, and then we'll see what happens. But those are, again, they're almost like propaganda versions of the reality. You can say the same thing all the other way around. You can say that the conservatives are so tight with their money that they will never give it to the people that actually need it, but they'll give tax cuts to the rich because they believe in Reaganomics, that if you give it to the rich will pass it down to their subjects, and there's evidence that never works. And then the other side is that the progressive are progressing, are moving forward. And if you stay back in the caveman times, you're never going to achieve better life for groups that have been underrepresented. So, you can say, well, the problem is not patriarchy, or the problem is not white, vast number of white men in power. The problem is that those white men are not sensitive to the needs of the immigrants, the minorities, and the women. So if you had a man who was in touch or woke or whatever, then he could represent those people. And that's been my challenge with this, like, tearing down all statues, because you have people who were abolitionists, you have people who are civil rights leaders, you have men who stood against the tide to protect people, and now those men have nothing to contribute. And that's one of the issues that they would throw at Bernie, like, well, you're just a guy, just like every other guy. And it's like, no, he's a guy who has an interest and who can use his influence as a male, and what some people characterize as a white male, even though he's Jewish, to bring about the positive change. And then he can surround himself with other people from different groups and build a rainbow coalition for the sake of those groups. But nobody wants to see that or hear that. They'd rather go with what's easy. So let's go with Joe Biden, or let's go with Trump, because Trump It's the epitome of the typical white guy. So that's my issue. It's like, my issue is that people are not willing to think outside of the box. And when they go back to their roots, let's say that the Christianity or Judeo-Christian values are fantastic, they don't go back to them to the best version of that. They go to the same old corrupt and lack of interest in everybody else version. So that's my concern. It's like, if we're gonna be a majority WASP country, why do we have to be the worst kind of the WASP? Why can't we be the cool ones, the nice ones? I've met older white men who are fantastic and in touch with the work of Martin Luther King, with the work of Gandhi. Now people are hating on Gandhi too. Like, there has to be this sense of enough is enough. It's like, you can bring elements that are wonderful. Like, you know, we know in the biblical tradition, there's all these great ideas. You can bring them in and you can implement them, but people are too busy like fighting about who's gonna win next time and who's the true hero of the people and stuff like that. And nobody's living out those virtues that we all cherish. The virtues that we all cherish is compassion and desire for the well-being of others and fighting for the rights of the oppressed. Like, that should be like the first thing that people should think about. It's like, okay, so if you don't care about what's going on with the police and with the minorities, what's the next thing you should care about? You should care about the poor, and you should care about the people, the voiceless. So if from the number of people who have experienced some type of injustice within the Black Lives Movement, how many of those people are don't have access to the same stuff that other people do? How many of those people are impoverished? And then how many of those people don't have representation or a voice to help them defend themselves when something goes wrong? That should be a baseline. If you say, well, I don't care about socialists, I don't care about, what do they call it? The new thing where the politics of race or gender politics or what do they call them?
Identity politics.
I don't care about identity politics. I don't care about the suffrage of any group. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all created equal in the eyes of God. Okay, do you care about people that don't have access to medical care? Do you care about people that don't have money to pay their bills and to eat? Are those people worthless? Because all religious traditions, even the most far out ones, like you hear an atheist and a Satanist, and they both tell you, of course we have to worry about the people who are widows and orphans. If we don't care about them, then we're wasting our time on earth. So, and then people say, well, I don't care about the environment. I don't care about all this hippy dippy baloney. And it's like, okay, do you care about surviving? Do you care about passing on potable water and breathable air to your children? Whatever. I'm all for the big oil, and whatever they want to do it. I don't care. God is going to come back and take care of us. Okay, man. Like, if you're that far gone, then there's nothing to talk about. But if you're a normal human being who has the desire to at least be at peace, you don't have to go hug a tree or hang out with a homeless person. If you just want to have a peaceful society, wouldn't you want for the people who are struggling or the people who have issues to at least be heard? It's like, I don't agree. I don't think that they're truly suffering. I think they're all whining and making stuff up. Okay, but they have a chance to share their concerns just like anybody else. And you know, and the same thing goes for voting. Well, you know, I can take off on Tuesday and go vote and forget about everybody else. It's like, what kind of selfish world do we live in that none of the things that we had all agreed on? And that's what's sad, is that if you're born in this country, you come and you get the package no matter if you agree with it or not. The package is democracy, justice, pursuit of happiness. All that comes with being born in America. Well, when you come as an immigrant, you're coming because of that. You're coming because you're given the chance to partake of that. If for some reason you're not able to, or they keep it from you, or they discriminate you while you're trying to get it, you can always squeeze yourself in and get to it. But now we hear that are people who are constantly struggling, constantly trying, and they can't get ahead. So then you would say, well, let me reach out. And a lot of conservatives say, well, I help people through my church, through the organizations that I donate to, through the homeless shelter that my ministry has started with other ministries or whatever. Fantastic. The problem is, if you're going to be methodical, is that going to be the final solution? Are we going to live in the same type of world where all you do is bandages? Like, you give someone a bag of food and you pay their electric bill, and then they come back and they want more, and they keep on coming back. Why? Because we haven't changed the minimum wage. We haven't changed access to healthcare. We haven't changed bettering schools so people can actually go through school, get educated, get a good college degree, and then be able to succeed. So if we say, well, that's not my problem, they can handle that themselves, then you can't complain when you start having problems, societal problems, such as crime, such as unrest, such as even, when we talk about conspiracy theories, the reason there's so many conspiracy theories in the US is because people are ignorant. If they had a well-rounded education, they wouldn't be worried about George Soros and the Illuminati and all that nonsense, because they would know that it's just a bunch of ridiculous stuff that keeps you away from taking care of business. So let's be serious. How can we all collaborate to create a better situation? Because it saddens me that after 56 years, we're still back to the same place. If you remember in the Selma movie, they did the first protest. Well, actually, before the first march, they had a protest in the middle of the night. I don't know who came up with that. That was a very bad idea. And the police was there, and they beat them all up, and they chased a kid to a diner, and he was hiding, pretending he was eating, and they shot him. And I told my wife, that movie is very representative of what we're going on now, because, if it is true what happened, what was depicted in the movie, what the police would have said in that situation. I felt threatened. I didn't know if the guy had a gun. He was already causing trouble in the streets. I had to defend myself. And then they left it at that. So then you have Martin Luther King speaking at his funeral, and he's saying the same things that the Black Lives Matter movement is saying, is that the justice shall persevere, and that it should be the justice that is for everyone. So why is it that almost 60 years later, we're having the same struggle? And now it's not about voting. Now it's not about access to some resources. Now is this idea that you get criminalized, you get categorized as a criminal for doing things that as Hassan Minhaj on his show said, are normal things. One guy was going to get iced tea at the store, and he was killed. Another guy, he gave a fake $20 bill, but he was just shopping. There was another guy who was just sitting there at the bus station or at the train station. There was people who were in their home. There were people who were in their backyard. All these unnecessary deaths. What is it showing? And it's a societal problem that we don't value like we should, or that certain lives don't matter. That's really the question that is being asked. And the first thing you hear from people is like, oh, they're just, they want all the attention. They want special rights. They want to only worry about individuals in their community who we know were committing crimes or doing naughty things. And then they got, they put in bad stuff, and bad stuff came their way. It's like, come on, man. Like, how many cases do we need to hear where things have gone horribly wrong for a change to happen? And I'm surprised that this movement is actually bringing about change, because it's really hard to push politicians, either from the left or the right, to actually enact laws that are going to be beneficial to the public. But why does it take looting and arson and millions of people exposed to the virus to bring about that change? The biggest complaint that other ministers had about Martin Luther King was that he was too radical and too demanding, and that he needed to just let things be and happen progressively and with time. And he's like, there's no time for injustice. There's no time for a lack of interest, because if you leave things the way they are, more people are going to get killed, more people are going to suffer, and you're not serving God. You're not living out the principles of Jesus, of the prophets, of the people that we look up to. None of those ideas matter if you're just going to sit back and relax and enjoy your comfort and let everybody else get destroyed. So I know that I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, Joe, but this is the kind of stuff that I want people to think about. It's easy to just sit back and think about it and maybe like, well, maybe I should have gotten involved. And I'll be the first one that I haven't really been involved because of fears of the virus, because not really understanding like what are the demands and what are the ultimate goals of this. But it's becoming more clear as time passes. Like now I can see what is like the basis. There's people who want everything. They want equal payment for women. They want healthcare. They want too many things. And I think that that's what causes a lot of havoc, because it's like the Occupy movement. There was so many demands that it just became overbearing, and the system is so well established that it's impossible to change it if all you have is demands, but you don't have like there was a formula that Martin Luther King said in the movie, and I wish I would have written down, but it's like we march, we negotiate, and we enact laws. So there was this like 3 steps, and whenever they didn't work, they went back to the thing. So they kept on marching, they kept on negotiating with politicians or pressuring them, and they kept on passing laws that would benefit the public. And it was constant, to the point of actually forcing LBJ to put in the Voting Rights Act. So I just feel that the conservative movement is like stagnant because they are at the mercy of Trump. If Trump says anybody who doesn't follow me is a baby killer, then they all bow down to whatever he's doing. And to me, that's very dangerous. And I've, you know, that's what happened with Hillary. It's like, if you support Hillary, you are pro-abortion and you're killing the next generation. So then all Christians and conservatives who are from that standpoint, they all fell behind Trump. No matter what other rhetoric, no matter what other ideas he had, the only thing that mattered was that. So I wish we would settle that issue and we would all agree on it, but we still haven't agreed. And my friend said that the problem with Roe versus Wade is that they rammed it down people's throats. If every state would have agreed, then we would have a more cohesive front regarding that issue. But it was similar to what happened with the Gay Marriage Act, where federal law established it and everybody had to fall in line. And I guess it's similar to the Civil Rights Act, where it's like everybody had to agree, and they even brought the military to support the marchers. The problem is that we are a divided nation, and when it comes down to abortion, even gay rights now have kind of settled. Once it was passed, it kind of like, you know, it wasn't that big of a struggle anymore. But the issue with abortion is still such it's a fiery issue. It creates so much turmoil in people's hearts that it quickly divides people. So again, I've thrown a lot at you, but what are your thoughts? Maybe on a couple of things I've said.
Didn't know a lot of that. The things about all the different issues is interesting. I wonder why we have so many divisive issues in this country, where we can't seem to get together around any of them, or around certain ones. Even, I guess maybe it's just natural to be in conflict, or to have difference of opinions and fight. It would still just be kind of nice if we could get some kind of contract for these are the issues that we care about. These are what we're going to do with them. These are how we're going to address it. And it's just this ongoing, laborious journey of trying to figure it out together. But I don't know, what do you think about how the movie? Now, I remember the movie. I remember the movie being fascinating, and I do remember that part about the young boy getting killed in a fighting. And I remember MLK going to jail, and he's in prison, and he's writing, and he's talking about his wife, and he was asking somebody to send a message to his wife about something. I don't remember, but he was writing like a love note or something, a love poem. But I actually can't remember exactly what it was. But he was in jail, and it was like the first time that he was in jail, and he was realizing that this might be serious, and I might need to talk to my wife about it, or what are we gonna do? And yeah, it was a really just touching scene in that in the film that for some reason stuck with me. But the political part of that is, maybe there's something to that, in the sense that it also shows in the film his personal struggle and how he had to work through that and get through that, and the people around him that were with him. I don't know, just him. Just the focus of the movie, I felt like, was for him, and on MLK, what his experience was, what his mindset was, and how he handled all this pressure from different sides, because he had the authorities after him, there's cops after him, he's got his buddies, he's got his not everybody agreed with him, even who he thought were his friends. So it's the artist who plays this man, very famous, and the socialist leader, who is also a civil rights movement activist, but he went through South America, I want to say, or Africa, and he was very outspoken and more violent. And that was his thing, was I just had it.
It's Malcolm X.
Oh, thank you, Malcolm X. And so he didn't even, I just remember the scenes in the movie where they're arguing back and forth about, how do we deal with this? And Malcolm X is like, you have to stand up, you have to be violent and stuff. And eventually MLK converted him to the side of peaceable protest, and the side of speaking out and using your voice as a way of inciting change, of making change.
Let's talk about Malcolm X, Joe, because I think that there's a misunderstanding of what Malcolm X was saying, and I'm no expert on him, but I kind of get an idea of what he was trying to do. So, he was part of Nation of Islam, and I have a lot of issues with Nation of Islam as group. But what happened with Malcolm X is that he had a transformation. He was someone who was committing crimes, and then in jail he met some more people who were starting the movement, and the movement had some points that are positive. It's kind of like the Mormon Church, where you might not agree with their theology, but you agree with their principles. So the principle was that the way for African Americans to overcome poverty and overcome racial prejudice was for them to have tight-knit families, for men to be involved in their children's lives. And there's a lot of African Americans who are already doing that, but there was a movement who was supporting that, and who was, and it had a church vibe to it, but it was a different type of church. Instead of typical Baptist or Protestant African American church, it was a new group that it's actually a cult in every definition, because it's based around the leader who says that he's a reincarnation of Allah. But the issue that happened to him is that they were very militant, but I have never heard Malcolm X ask for people to commit crimes. What I've heard him say is that by any means are necessary, that he's willing to defend African Americans. So he wanted African Americans to have access to guns like any other American because of the Second Amendment, so then they could defend themselves. And that's the difference between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And I just heard an interview with Dr. Cornel West, who's an expert on all these African American leaders, and he was saying that he himself is not a complete pacifist like Martin Luther King. He is a traditional Christian pacifist. And the distinction that he was making is that throughout Christian history, and you even see this in Judaism, there have been people who have said, okay, fine, we will be lambs to the slaughter. We will be as gentle as dust. We will allow for our oppressors to hurt us and to attack us to a certain point. So, you know, you can go down like Jesus and like Martin Luther King and be completely peaceful, and if people punch you in the face, you forgive them and stuff like that. Or you can be like the resistance in the ghettos in World War II, or like some of the people in the liberation movement, liberation theology movement, where you are meek and you're mild, but you're not going to allow for evil to triumph, and you have to defend yourself. There are other groups that say that you have to attack your enemy. So that would be the difference between someone who's defending their family, someone who's fighting and doing preemptive war and acts of sabotage and stuff like that, like the Mandela, the movement under Mandela and stuff like that in South Africa. So the issue is that you have a spectrum of people who are looking for the well-being of their families and their ethnic group, and then you have people who are pure pacifists, almost like the Quakers and people like that, where they wouldn't even fight in a war, they wouldn't pick up a gun or whatever. And you have other people who pick up a gun in difficult circumstances, and they would defend their country or their families when it's necessary. So what I know of Malcolm X is that the militancy that he wanted was that he wanted self-segregation. He wanted for African Americans to survive and exist on their own, to protect and to support their own businesses, and to create the ability for them to exist or coexist, but without being integrated. And the rest of the civil rights movement wanted to be integrated, and they were willing to work with people from all different races and religious groups to be part of that. At one point, when Malcolm X went to Mecca, and he partook of the pilgrimage and saw Muslims from every race and country, that's when he had a change of heart, and he actually spiritually converted to true Islam and became a faithful like servant of God from that perspective. So then when he came back, he was having a conversation with Martin Luther King's wife, where he said, you know, in the past I've criticized him, I've talked bad about him, but I want to be the bad guy, so then he gets propped up as the good guy. So I don't know if that's a true statement in the movie, but they were trying to consolidate all different conflict between them. And what I was saying is that Malcolm X was willing to make himself look bad in the eyes of the FBI, in the eyes of the police. They said, if he shows up, we know we're going to have trouble. Let's go with Martin. Martin is actually someone who we can reason with. So I think that was a good juxtaposition of two different styles, but at the end they had the same goal in mind: is the protection and the well-being of their fellow African Americans. And that's the hardest thing for non-African Americans to understand, is that when you have been in the struggle, when you have experienced that type of prejudice, then you have to find a way to communicate that to others. So, you know, I came to America with this idea that we were all equal, that everybody got along. And then I saw self-segregation in the sense of people only hanging out with people they like or people that looks like them, and that's always going to happen. But there shouldn't be this discrimination or dismissal of people that don't look or act like you. So what we have in common as Americans is that we have, again, the values, the principles, the virtues that we should all agree on. Now the people are saying, well, there are some people who think that arson and looting is actually helpful, and that it takes that to bring about change. I'm like, whatever, man. If you are in that camp, you can stay there, and I have nothing to do with you, because it's a destructive act that is only going to cause trouble. So if you think that if you're going to piggyback on somebody else's poor decisions, and now you're going to say that's what I brought about change, I would debate you about it, and I would actually deny and refuse that type of approach. I think those were the kind of conflicts that people were having back then, and now it's to the point of is the government, is the military, is the police, is everybody going to have their hands tied that the moment that they suppress any type of violent behavior, they're going to be seen as destructive themselves. And like I've said in the last show, if you destroy something, how can you complain about violence? How can you complain about too much use of force if you yourself are having too much force? And that's what, when you have peaceful protesters and they get attacked, then you see this, like, we're fighting against police brutality, and then we're going to commit police brutality to show that we're not brutal. And then you have protesters who say, we want peace and we want protection for all people, but we're going to go burn some stuff. It's like, come on, man. Like, they're not thinking clearly, and they're not following through with their values. So maybe they don't have the same values. And that's the issue. Is you can't live in a society where people don't have the same values. So if we're going to value human life, we're going to value people's personal stuff. They say, oh, well, it's only property. It's like, that is something you should at least have the decency to say, well, I don't care only about property, but I don't want people messing with my stuff. So why would I do it to somebody else? And then I might not appreciate police being overly aggressive, but I do appreciate some police that actually protects people. That's what people are not thinking clearly. Like, they don't understand that if it cannot be all or nothing, because you're left with more conflict than what you started with. If there was an issue from the beginning, now you're creating more issues, and it's building up, and then you won't be able to quench that fire.
So I do think that one of the problems is that, I know this is outing myself, but I do think one of the problems with a lot of the protests in general, and maybe some of the difference, and from my experience with protesting in college and speaking out, being a social activist, was that exactly what you brought up earlier, which was doing things from a distance. And it's so easy to just change your profile picture or to throw up some quotes from, one of my favorites, Gandhi, or from MLK, and have it be some kind of hearkening back to this time of when peaceful protests were effective, and equate that with me sitting in my room posting something on Facebook. Not the same. Just not. So I think I did so much of that, and I wish that I would have been more involved, because it would have allowed me to learn what the real issues, concerns, experience of the people were that I was so adamantly against. I mean, I talked about the Bay City area protest that I went to. I didn't talk to the people who work there. I didn't talk to the owners of the company. I didn't talk to the people of Bay City and ask, what do you think about that? And how is it affecting your life in the first place? And is this just kind of a frivolous public display of my ego? say I can stand in front of people and just spout off my opinion, and without any real repercussions, because civilly, because of the civility of the people who are sitting there listening to me, of the the people who put on the opportunity to speak and to hear the public's concerns, to have a public hearing, sort of taking advantage of the public's trust to allow civil discourse by just going and saying things that are very productive. I mean, it might inspire somebody to do something different. I'm not saying that. That's for sure can happen, because words are powerful, and there's power in words, and the words that we use and the way that we use them and how we say them. But there's something to it of being young and not knowing the difference between how things work really, and looking back on college when I did that, I would have been much better off spending my time studying, working on my papers, getting my grade a little bit better, or even better yet, for me, getting out of my room, talking to my roommates, going to hang out and have a beer, with the guys. Like, that would have been a much better, and just shooting the crap, talking about nothing and having a fun time. That would have been a much more productive use of my energy than worrying about something that is over there. It does affect me. It's in a different part of Michigan, it's a different community, but to which directly responsible for my action in that regard is not going to have the greatest possible effect than probably getting my grades, having good brothers, having good friends to talk to get to know, having strength in those relationships that would allow me to be, to be successful in the long run. Whereas thinking short term, this is something exciting for me to do on a weekend, I'm just gonna, other people are going to do it, I'm gonna go do it. So that's the lesson for me there, is how to spend your time, how to spend your energy is important.
So, but what do you mean? So those protests didn't do anything, and they didn't do anything internally or externally. Like, they didn't bring about change or get you to be more aware of the need for advocacy or anything like that.
Didn't get the result. The plant didn't shut down. It continued. I got to get up and speak, and I got to practice my social speaking, my public speaking skills. So that was useful in that regard. And I met some other people who were like-minded, and we had interesting conversation, but quite honestly, I mostly sat by myself and was thinking about, what am I going to say? How am I going to do this public speech? And because I wrote it out, I spent hours working on it, and then now is my time to deliver. So when I was standing there, I felt really good after I was done, because I realized my voice was heard, and that was important. That at least my voice was heard in the public sphere. So or at all. And it's sharing something that I was passionate about and cared about deeply at the time, and it was in regards to my study too, being in sustainable business.
Did you have any with the Occupy movement?
I didn't really get into the Occupy movement. I read some things about it. I understood that it was an attempt to create an alternative society in New York, and I read about it and watched the videos and watched it kind of slowly fizzle out, because I realized as soon as someone said, we have no planning document, Yeah, this is not going to be easy for you guys, trying to figure out how you gonna build a movement or an alternative civilization without having some kind of founding document to guide you in your planning. It's just, America was founded by white men who came from Europe to escape religious persecution. And one of the first things that they did once they got established, once they got food and shelter and water and their lives, their basic necessities met, that they decided, how are we going to have government? How are we going to manage all of this now and create this new civilization? Because they're escaping from Europe, which had years and years and years, hundreds of years of monarchy and aristocracy and rules about how society should be run. And if you're coming to a new land and you're going to play cowboy, then you're going to have to come up with your own rules. Because there were rules there. The Native Americans were already there. They had their own civilizations. They had their own culture. They had their own peoples. But they lived by a very different set of rules and a very different religious mindset too. That dictated, that their religion dictated for them their society. So the founding fathers, they had to sit down and go back to say, what are our core values, what are our core principles to what are the core religious beliefs that are guiding our creation of this building up of a new society and creating a whole new society. Because they were Christians, so they had Christian values, they had Christian thinking that got them so far. It was Protestant, so it wasn't Roman, so they were broken off already from the Roman church and the Roman way of thinking, which was very legal, very disciplined, and everything was exact. So having different I don't think they were some of them maybe were an Anglican, Wesleyan, maybe Mormons, probably some Mormons. I don't really know. That they different types of Christianity that had different theology and different points of religion and belief that made them break off into many different churches. But somehow in the American landscape, they were able to come together and share those values and share those virtues that allowed them to build something which was quite remarkable. Unfortunately, as history demonstrated, because of some of those very religious values and virtues that they had, led to the slaughter of hundreds of thousands, millions of Native Americans and peoples. And that's the difficult part to grasp and to work through, is how was it that Christians who profess to love God and have Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, he was a peace-loving man and talked about compassion and kindness and in mercy, that they were unmerciful in the way that they dealt with Native Americans. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense to how they go about build new society. So how can you build a society on the bones of other people? It's a terrible but yet true, fact of history.
I think right now we are so overwhelmed with information that it's hard to make heads or tails of any subject, and it's easy to get polarized or thrown into one camp or the other when, like you said in the beginning of the show, we don't like to be told what to do, and now we're having the problem we're even told what to think. So I think that we pride ourselves in trying to help people think critically, and these issues are so complicated that we have to make time to discuss them thoroughly. So thanks a lot, man. Always good to see you.
Thank you, David. Good to see you too.
Take care.
You too.